Take it from Crinkles. That's me. The best breakfast under the big top is post-sugar rice Crinkles.
Bigfoots and poltergeists and ghost hunting and UFOs, cattle mutilations.
They're being told by conference promoters that there's a hitchhiker effect that follows people home.
What's going on, guys, and welcome back to my channel. Last video we talked about skinwalkers and some of the creepy stories people have with encountering them, and today we're going to be looking at some of the most unexplainable Reddit stories found across the internet. If you guys are new here and you like these kind of videos, make sure you guys drop a like and subscribe, and it would mean the absolute world to me. But I won't waste any more time, so let's get right into it. Working the graveyard shift as a cop sucks, for a lot of reasons. The main one being the eeriness of the night. Now, saying that might make me sound like a baby, considering that I'm no small guy, but it's true. Something about being stuck in your car with no human life in sight. It has an almost alien feeling to it. I'm sure it would help if I lived in an area that wasn't as heavily forested as Wyoming, but as it stands, if there's a light on near me, I almost can't see it with how dense the foliage is. And most nights there's nothing to do, so it's just me and the silence. I usually take the time to catch up on a show that I'm watching, or finish a book, and on the off chance I do get a call, it's always something small, like a wellness check, or a suspicious character outside a bar. But I am happy to take those calls though, as it gets me back towards populated areas rather than some gravel road where they have me scouting for speeders. And to be honest, it's not an exciting job, but it does pay the bills. The whole thing happened 2 days ago, on a relatively warm night. I was working my first night shift in a while after getting back from vacation. Jimmy, the officer who replaced me while I was out, told me that he finally understood what I was talking about when I said it was creepy. I chuckled, assuring him that I would take over for a while, and advised him to bring something to do next time to keep his mind off of it. If anyone were to understand what the transition from day to night shift was like, it would be me, so I tried to make him feel comfortable. After all, if he started taking them more, I wouldn't have to sit in the darkness as much. He handed me the keys, and I had an idea. This was the only night shift I was scheduled for that week, so why not make it a little more bearable? I decided to invite him along. He could either sit at a desk all night in a dimly lit precinct with only one other person, or hang out in the cruiser with me. And honestly, I don't think the blinding white walls of the station are that much more comforting than the darkness. And I think he agreed, because he accepted the offer pretty quickly. We parked on one of the designated hiding spots and settled in, watching some shitty horror movie and cracking open a few beers. And sure, we shouldn't have been doing that, but who was gonna arrest us? We weren't small guys either, so it would take more than a couple of beers to get us tipsy. We also didn't expect to be moving much. That wasn't until my work phone rang. I sighed, rubbed my eyes, and answered it. The thing is, it was already 3 AM, so at least we'd made it halfway through the shift before something happened. I immediately heard giggling on the other end, and I said hello a few times and was about to hang up when I heard a voice on the other end of the line. It was Brian. This was the only other officer on duty that night, and he was in charge of manning the station's phone. Usually this guy was as monotone as a depressed robot, so to hear him laugh was already pretty weird.
Hey Tom, how's it going?
I can't complain, just living the high life with Jimmy here. What's up?
You're not gonna believe this shit. I got an emergency call from the old AMEK factory on the McCabin Road.
McCabin Road? How? That place doesn't have any power. Or phones even.
That's why I'm laughing so hard. The person who called said they broke into the place to try and steal equipment, and now they're somehow stuck inside.
It was silent on the cruiser for a second. But Jimmy and I slowly turned to look at each other, and then almost simultaneously we burst out laughing. You gotta be kidding me.
I'm dead serious. When I got the call, I almost pissed myself trying not to laugh at the poor guy.
Damn, I'm about to piss myself right now.
Anyways, do me a favor and go and help the guy get out of there. It's your choice whether you want to arrest him for trespassing or not, but I feel like he's had a bad enough night as it is.
We'll take care of it, don't worry. It beats giving another speeding ticket, and I don't know if I'm gonna be able to keep a straight face though.
Don't worry, I sure as shit wouldn't be able to. Give me a call back if you need backup, alright? I'll have to call the precinct up in Pinedale if you do, and you know they have their parade this week, so I'm sure they got a few guys to spare.
Sounds good, Brian. We'll keep you posted. I hung up and flicked the cruiser's lights on. They pierced through the darkness, and we peeled out into the road, making sure not to hit any deer along the way. And yeah, it was only about a 10-minute drive, but you never know. After being on the road for a couple minutes, we finally ended up getting to the entrance of the building, and I got out of the car to undo the rusted chain blocking the road. The place had been abandoned for at least 10 years. After AMEK moved its drilling operations up north and took half the town's population with them. Now, the place was just a drinking spot for local teens, and it showed with the amount of graffiti sprayed along the sides. We got out of the cruiser, flicked our flashlights on, and started looking for an entrance. Jimmy was noticeably on edge, probably because he didn't know this place existed. He was relatively new to the area, and I'm pretty sure this was the first time he had to get out of the car during a night shift, although I didn't ask. He went around the left side of the building while I took the right, both of us looking for a rusted door or a busted window. I was peeling brambles off my shorts when I heard Jimmy start yelling. I immediately hightailed it back towards the other side of the building, hand on my holster, preparing for the worst. Was this a trap? Maybe the dude we came here to find was some sicko looking to hurt us. Or worse. I sprinted around the corner, shining my flashlight in front of me, expecting the worst. My flashlight illuminated Jimmy, who was doubled over laughing. I was confused, and immediately asked if he was alright. He looked up at me with the widest grin that I've ever seen on him. I totally got you. I was relieved that nothing actually happened, but was mostly annoyed that he did that to me. It was almost 4 in the morning, and we were on the tail of some idiot in the middle of an abandoned warehouse. For a second I thought he was getting attacked, and he'd be lying in a bloody heap by the time that I got over to him. I think he saw that I was pissed though, because his face immediately sank, and he started to apologize, saying he was just trying to lighten the mood. I took a deep breath and smiled at him. I assured him that I'd get him back at some point, and to just focus on getting in for now. We found a broken window that we assumed he climbed in through, and shined our flashlights on the floor inside to make sure we weren't about to step on nails or something. As we climbed into the place, I radioed Brian and asked him to call a few other officers over to us, just in case something went wrong. After the shit that Jimmy just pulled, I was on edge that something bad might actually happen, so I figured it was better to be safe than sorry. The power in the place still didn't work, and in hindsight I have no idea why I even bothered checking. So it looked like we were going to have to put our flashlights to work. We called out a few times into the darkness, seeing if we get a response, but to no avail. We walked past the old drills and ore processors, our feet clicking against the concrete floor. After searching the bulk of the main room, we headed to the hallway at the very back of the factory. And I knew this place pretty well, since I'd been called there during the daytime a few years back to clear out some drunk partiers who had snuck in. Still, it was a whole different beast at night, and the fact that the hallway immediately branched into 3 more definitely didn't help. This is where we made our first mistake, and it was a pretty stupid one. We decided to split up. I know, it's how horror movies start, and how characters die, but we were both tired, and our energy drinks were wearing off. We agreed that we keep our radios on at all times and let each other know if we found the guy. At this point, I assumed that he had found his way out and ran into the woods in fear of being arrested, but we still had to sweep the place just in case. I wasn't planning on arresting the guy, as I figured that he'd had a bad enough night as it is, and the old equipment he was planning on taking wasn't of any use to anyone anymore, so I would have let him off with a warning. Now though, I was starting to change my mind. I didn't want to have to search the entire back half of this place, especially given the fact that there were 3 floors worth of rooms here. And it didn't help that the building was split into 2 sides that weren't connected. So, if one of us found something, the other would have to walk all the way over to them. And I was starting to understand why this place wasn't used anymore. Every time I passed a room, I'd shine my flashlight in and call out. As evidenced by Jimmy's voice over the radio, he had a similar system going on. When I reached the first room of the 2nd floor, he was already on the 3rd, so I warned him to slow down a bit just to make sure that the room was completely clear. And I was met with complete silence. And I repeated myself. Still, nothing.
Hey, Tom, I think I see something.
What is it?
Down the hall from me, there's a hand sticking out of the doorway.
I stopped in my tracks. What do you mean, a hand?
There's a hand waggling its fingers at me.
I'll be right over. Don't go near it and don't do shit. Just slowly back up, in fact. I started towards the stairs, and admittedly slower than I should have. At this point, I was creeped out, but the rational side of me was telling me that someone had gotten stuck and was motioning for Jimmy to come closer to help him. When I reached the 1st floor of the building, the other side of me started screaming at me to get moving. And that's the side that I started to listen to. As I approached the entrance to the other building, my radio suddenly erupted.
Tom.
What? What is it?
There's a face. There's someone looking at me.
I didn't respond. I just broke into a sprint, towards the access door at the end of the hall. I grabbed the handle and pushed, but it didn't budge. I rammed my shoulder into it, screaming Jimmy's name, and behind the door I heard faint yelling, and the door finally gave out. I started sprinting up the dark staircase, and I took my gun out of my holster. Whatever was going on up there, it wasn't good. I reached the entrance of the 3rd floor, and again, the door was locked. I bashed my shoulder into the door once again, calling his name. And this time, though, there was no response. No screaming, just silence. I drew my pistol and unloaded almost the entire clip into the lock, and the door still didn't budge. Something had to be blocking it from the other side. I slammed against the door so hard that things started flying off my belt. First was my knife, and then my taser, then my flashlight. I stopped for a second to pick it up, but it just kept rolling until it hit the edge of the stairwell and fell down. I couldn't see shit anymore, but I didn't have time to go get it. The door was starting to push open, and I had to get through. I kicked it so hard that I thought that I broke my ankle, but I didn't care. And it finally caved in enough for me to slip through into the hallway. I once again called out Jimmy's name, and as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a light at the end of the hallway. Not a flashlight, but a very dimly lit room. Standing in the doorway was a silhouette, and it had to be him. I called out to him again, but I didn't step closer this time. The silence was broken when the giggling started. It was faint enough that I couldn't tell if it was him, but it sounded like it. And the giggling eventually turned into laughter, and he started to move, but he didn't leave the doorway. He was just moving in place, jerking from side to side, and it almost looked like he was dancing. I lowered my gun and called out to him again. I knew what was happening. He was fucking with me. All of this was a setup to prank me again, and I was royally pissed off and started screaming down the hallway. Are you fucking kidding me? I thought somebody was attacking you, man. And I told you earlier to stop messing around, and now you almost give me a heart attack by doing this shit? What's wrong with you? I put my gun back in my belt and turned back towards the door. I'd had more than enough for one night. I'm going outside to wait for backup to get here, and I'm going with them back to our station. When you're ready to stop fucking around, take the car and don't talk to me for a week. I stormed out of the broken door and picked up all of my stuff. I climbed back out through the window and stood in the darkness in front of the factory, waiting for the backup to arrive. Luckily, they were well on their way already, and got there about 5 minutes after I got outside. I hopped into the backseat of their cruiser and buckled myself in. Whenever you're ready, you can drive me back to the station. It's about 20 minutes down the main road. The officer behind the wheel turned to look at me, and then turned back towards the wheel and pointed to the factory. Don't you want to wait for your partner? It looks like he's at the window up there. I rolled the window down and looked outside, and sure enough, there was a faint light coming from one of the windows, and what looked to be a flashlight beam, illuminating someone's silhouette. He'll take our car back at the station. I'm pretty pissed off at him right now, so he can take care of it. And with a nod, the officer shifted into reverse and we backed onto the main road. And once we got back to the precinct, I thanked him for the lift and immediately hopped into my truck and drove back home. I was exhausted and didn't even really care to wait for Jimmy to bring the car in. Jimmy didn't show up for work yesterday, and he didn't return the car either. We thought he had just taken a sick day and forgot to phone in, or maybe he was scared to face me after his little prank backfired, and everyone I told about it seemed to be on my side, and maybe he'd know that I'd tell people about it, so I thought maybe he was afraid of the corrective action. At least, that was my theory yesterday. He didn't show up today either, and everyone started to get a bit worried, even me. We sent a couple of officers out to the factory to see if he had left in the cruiser, or took an Uber home and left it there, and sure enough, it was parked in the same spot. And when they saw this, they phoned me to come in and help search the area, just in case. It was my day off, so I was irritated, but I did hope he was okay. We searched the entire factory and didn't find anything. That was until we got to the third floor hallway that we'd been on a few days ago. I got up the stairs last and found one officer vomiting in the corner of the stairwell and the other shielding his eyes in disgust. I pushed past them and walked into the hallway. The floor was stained with a trail of blood leading towards the end of the hall. And there, hanging from the doorway, was Jimmy. He'd been absolutely mangled. His stomach was eviscerated, and his eyes and tongue were missing. Most notably, though, were his arms and legs. The veins had been almost completely ripped from them, and braided so tightly together that they formed makeshift ropes. Seeing this, I didn't immediately join the officer both in vomiting. I just stood there, completely stunned. And that changed, though, when I walked into the room behind his body. Above him, attached to the doorway, was a makeshift pulley system, a system that his veins had been run through. It looked like the guy was almost using him like a puppet. At about 2018 through 2019, I was about 18, and I was living in Nebraska, where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in NE, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. But the city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of those big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because, well, it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions, and plus his parents were super cool, and we could drink out there, as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun, and even though I was, and still am, quite scared of the dark, I would just not go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting, and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. And I always felt a weird energy driving to and from his place, if it was late at night, but never had anything happen, until one night. The drive out there was a long winding two-way road that had thick trees on both sides, and you passed one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course, besides the street lamps every once in a while, and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to have sped through this section of road many times just to get there as fast as possible. This specific night, though, was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down and listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam on my brakes. Right in front of me, in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards away, was what looked like a family. Again, picture a completely pitch black road with thick forests on both sides and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 3, maybe 4, and an average height man. And there was a child. Short hair, but I couldn't tell the gender based on the clothes, but they looked normal. Not tattered, but not nice. And they were also not carrying any kind of light source. Meaning, before I arrived behind them in my car, they'd been walking in the pitch black, and they were all facing away from me. Walking completely silent in the middle of the street, the same direction that I was heading. I'd turn my music down to hear if they were speaking or if they had music playing, but they didn't, and the hairs on my arms immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move, and they seemed completely unaffected by me, and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought that I was going insane, or that I was dreaming. It was just so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing, and how truly strange it was, they all at the same time stopped walking, and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me, and I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for probably a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn, nearly running myself right off the road, and looking in the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. That was the part that sticks to my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked my rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to a main road, and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way that they looked at me. Every time I tell this story, I get one of 3 reactions. They immediately think I'm fucking cuckoo, think I'm lying, or have had something sort of similar happen to them. And I really don't care if no one believes me. Honestly, it was, and still is, the creepiest thing to ever happen to me, and I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the shit out of someone, a distraction of an attempted robbery or assault, or it was something more sinister. And I'm gonna tell myself for probably the rest of the day that it was the first option.